Hey everyone, let's just jump right into it because today we are tackling an absolutely historical epic. In this summary, we're going to walk through a narrative of the book of 2nd Chronicles. This is a truly profound record for a people who were desperately trying to make sense of their own history after returning from a devastating exile. I mean, we are talking about a text with breathtaking highs, crushing lows, and a seriously surprising glimmer of redemption at the end. Now, as we go through this, I want you to keep a specific question rolling around in the back of your mind. What actually turns a glittering golden empire into a fallen city? How does a nation at the absolute peak of wealth, wisdom, and divine favor end up as a pile of rubble with its people carried off into captivity? Well, we're going to see exactly how this text answers that dramatic question by laying bare the spiritual trajectory of a whole nation. All right, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We're tracing a 4-part historical arc today. Section 1, the reign of Solomon. Section 2, building the temple. Section 3, the kings of Judah. And wrapping up with Section 4, exile and restoration. To get our bearings across a sprawling history that spans literally centuries, here is how the timeline maps out. Our story kicks off right at year 1 of Solomon's reign, which is this era of total stabilization and crazy prosperity. By his 4th year, the massive temple construction begins. But following Solomon, we hit centuries of a divided kingdom with a dizzying succession of rulers. That long decline ultimately crashes into the devastating Babylonian exile in 586 BC, before a remarkable pivot happens in 539 BC with a decree from a foreign king. Okay, let's dive into our first major era, Section 1, the reign of Solomon, the Golden Age. So the text opens with God appearing to Solomon and basically handing him a blank check. But instead of asking for unfathomable riches or the destruction of his enemies, Solomon asks for wisdom. And it's fascinating, because he sought wisdom first to lead his people. The text explicitly points out that he was granted everything else as a byproduct: riches, wealth, honor, you name it. He amassed massive chariot armies and made silver and gold in Jerusalem as common as ordinary stones. It was an era of breathtaking building projects and absolute unparalleled security, which leads us directly into Section 2, building the temple, the central anchor of this entire civilization. Solomon decided to build a magnificent house for the Lord God in Mount Moriah. And pretty quickly, the health of the entire nation became completely tied to this one structure. To really wrap our heads around the staggering scale of this project, think about this number for a second. 600. That's 600 talents of fine gold used just to overlay the innermost holy house within the temple. They cast a massive molten sea of brass resting on 12 oxen, built huge pillars named Jachin and Boaz, and forged countless vessels of pure gold. The sheer weight of the brass couldn't even be calculated. It's just mind-blowing. And, Chapter 2, verse 1 makes it super clear that this wasn't just some weekend side project. This was his crowning achievement. Now, Solomon purposed to build a temple for the name of the Lord. He literally mobilized tens of thousands of workers, porters, stone cutters in the mountains, and overseers. He brought in highly skilled artisans. And when it was finally finished and dedicated with unimaginable amounts of sacrifices, the text describes fire coming down from heaven and the glory of the Lord filling the house in a thick cloud. It was the absolute zenith of their civilization. But history rarely stays at the summit, right? Let's move to Section 3, the kings of Judah, a divided kingdom. Following Solomon's death, a pretty harsh decision by his son Rehoboam totally splits the kingdom in two. And for the next several centuries, the original authors evaluate every succeeding king based on one very strict historical metric: their faithfulness. Specifically, how did they treat the temple? On one side of the coin, you have kings like Hezekiah and Josiah, who repaired the temple and removed idols. On the other side, you've got kings like Az and Manasseh who polluted the temple and literally built altars to foreign gods in every corner of Jerusalem. It brilliantly acts as a historical barometer. When Hezekiah takes the throne, he immediately opens up and repairs the doors of the Lord's house, bringing in priests to clear out all the accumulated filth. On the flip side, Manasseh, who comes along later, takes rebellion to a shocking extreme. He doesn't just neglect the temple, he actively pole boots it. He builds altars for all the host of heaven, right smack inside the two courts of the house of the Lord. The spiritual whiplash from generation to generation here is just incredibly intense. Just look at the absolute urgency here in chapter 29. In the first year of his reign in the first month, Hezekiah didn't wait. He didn't form an exploratory committee. He intuitively understood that the survival of the kingdom depended entirely on restoring its physical and spiritual anchor. And when he led this massive restoration in Passover, the text actually notes there was a joy in Jerusalem that hadn't been seen since the days of Solomon. Sadly, those moments of revival were pretty fleeting. That brings us to our final era, Section 4, Exile and Restoration, Collapse and Hope. The tragedy hits its absolute climax in this devastating turning point from the final chapter. All the officers of the priests and the people likewise were exceedingly unfaithful, and they polluted the house of the Lord. It wasn't just a few bad apples at the top anymore. The corruption had completely seeped into the priesthood and the general populace. They were mocking the messengers of God and despising his words until the wrath of the Lord arose. And the text chillingly states there was no remedy. The devastating consequence of this cycle, total collapse, the Babylonian exile. King Nebuchadnezzar's forces swept in, slaughtered the young men right in the sanctuary, looted all those massive, beautiful gold vessels Solomon had made centuries earlier, and burned that magnificent temple to the absolute ground. They broke down the walls of Jerusalem and carried anyone who survived away to Babylon. The Golden City was completely gone. This ushers in the exile, a really dark 70-year period of captivity in Babylon. And the text notes a very specific, poignant reason for this exact time frame. It says it was to fulfill the word of the Lord, to allow the land to enjoy her Sabbaths. Because the people had failed to observe the sabbatical rest for the land would finally get its rest while they sat in captivity. It's a bleak, incredibly sobering fulfillment of the warnings woven throughout the entire book. But then, right at the very end of the scroll, we get this profound, almost shocking plot twist. The book doesn't end in the ashes. The final two verses feature a decree from a completely foreign king, Cyrus of Persia. He declares that the Lord God has charged him to build him a house in Jerusalem, and he issues a royal decree allowing any of the exiled people to go back and rebuild. After 70 long years of darkness, a door swings wide open. The ultimate collapse is met with the promise of restoration. Which brings us to our final thought. Will we learn from these cycles of history? Recognizing that even after utter ruin, there's a path back to hope. The book of 2 Chronicles is so much more than just a dusty list of kings and battles. It's a profound explainer on the consequences of our choices, the real danger of forgetting our foundations, and the enduring reality that restoration is always possible, even when absolutely all seems lost. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this incredible text, and I'll see you all next time.